Hello and welcome to the Connected World here at IBC 2013. With me today is Dave Sallak, who is Worldwide CTO for Media at EMC Iceland. Dave, thank you for joining us.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's been a really busy show for you guys. I've been to your stand and it's very busy down there.
Indeed.
Tell us a bit about the transition, because EMC Iceland's had a quite exciting last few years.
Certainly has. I was a part of the organization before the acquisition in 2010, and we went from about 350 employees to being a part of a 40,000 employee organization with worldwide reach. What we found out of this process, now nearly 3 years into it, is that EMC has great resources to bring to the table that helps us reach customers in faraway places where broadcasters really are existing and have asked us to get to. So the ability for them to extend our reach, but also reinforce our ability to focus on the broadcast, content delivery, creation markets, which are critical to this business, has helped us to maintain, we feel, our leadership in this market for media.
Your use of scale-out storage was a bit of a revolution in the broadcast sector when you came onto the scene. And that's progressed quite a bit now. I mean, some of your larger installations are multi-petabyte, but what other areas are you working in now in terms of the content process?
So if you look at strong emerging trends today, we're seeing a lot of buzz standing aback as a storage vendor with 4K, and my own personal experience participating in other trade shows. This particular format does, in my opinion, have the traction in it to grow over the next series of several years to become a very predominant format, popular format, especially in major areas where customers will want to invest in experiencing that more strongly. The production of that is a very strong challenge for infrastructure. We are showing in our booth this year the ability to handle that production. But not only that, we're also partnering with cloud vendors. One of our strong vendor partnerships is with Atos, and with that relationship, we feel we can help extend infrastructure where customers are looking for more elastic use of infrastructure, especially around special events. We have the FIFA World Cup coming, certainly the Olympics on their semi-annual schedule, and how that impacts production is that a lot of organizations don't want to maintain heavy infrastructure for long periods of time. Cloud infrastructure, that elastic partnership to be able to work with Atos and be able to get that capacity or that performance and throughput required for that capacity is something that really helps them have burst capability. These are IT terms, things that EMC is very strong at, that with our Atos partnership allows us to bring to media customers more flexibility to work in these constrained budget realities that we have today, but deliver more compelling content every day.
One of the customers that you've mentioned at this show has been ITV, a major broadcaster across Europe. Mm-hmm. I know you worked on that project. That's an example of this changing workflow that you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Tell us a bit more about that project.
So when we approached ITV, we learned that they were going through a business change process, and they analyzed how they're going to be able to grow forward as a linear broadcaster and address customers using the devices they had. They asked us, how can we help them optimize their infrastructure of production across 8 different facilities throughout UK, and be able to, through that optimized business process, have better oversight over all the media they produce so that they can make more instances of that media and get it to more platforms in the marketplace and take advantage of the revenue opportunities. What we saw as this partnership with ITV was they saw the vision that was required to get to these markets. The challenge they had is they aren't a technology company when it comes to storage and the applications that run on there. They rely on vendors such as us to help them achieve breakthrough capabilities of business reinvention to become more distributed with infrastructure rather than centralized, and to also, through that distribution, take advantage of consolidation. So bring more workflows together on our stack to be able to extend and scale the business. Our scale-out technology has really been something they've fully embraced in order to be able to change their business.
It's clear when you talk to both broadcasters and new content providers that storage is no longer seen as an isolation, a target for the business. It has to be part of the workflow. Are you seeing that when you talk to customers around the world, that the nature of storage is changing from being a passive to a very active technology?
Absolutely. We often look at it this way. We're able to bridge 2 worlds as a part of EMC. One of the compelling reasons why I joined the Iceland organization, now part of that larger EMC, was because the ability to bridge IT and media and entertainment line of business production so that we understand what it takes to be able to produce compelling content, because we work with the manufacturers that are used to make those movies, that audio, that visual experience every day. But as organizations were trying to leverage IT infrastructure and learn about how to be able to move video over Ethernet and adjust to the new reality of, as I migrate away from SDI and I throw around Signal and I distribute it as packages, as file-based workflows, a lot of these discussions basically came around the fact that I need IT infrastructure for media, or I need media infrastructure for IT. This is something that really is distinctive for Isilon because it allows us to accomplish that unique task with the scale of EMC behind us so that we can do it for multiple business units of a large organization. This has been a really compelling event for us at these large organizations with the facilities in Asia when breaking news needs to come into America and European theaters. The ability to take advantage of our large scale to help them scale has been the differentiator.
You mentioned the regionalization of content now. There are broadcast customers I know that work on multiple continents across 10, 12, 15 time zones. When you get to those levels of scale, questions like resilience, redundancy, protecting those assets start to be asked. Questions that maybe a few years ago weren't as commonly posed by broadcasters. Is that the case?
It has been an emerging trend. The more that you deliver on multiple platforms, whether it's over the top or whether it's using latest generation IPTV and other technologies to be able to distribute more versions of the same media you have, to leverage the inherent revenue value that's inside there and extract more revenue from that, the more you distribute that content, the challenge that you have is being able to be consistent on the impression that you leave with your viewers as you capture that and associate ad revenue to those platforms. The more diversified your platform becomes as you attempt to do that as an organization, the more you're exposed to risk of outages because you're distributing media across so many places. If you don't get good coverage, if you're not there where the customer is looking, they're going to find that content, that compelling event, elsewhere from another provider. So therefore, the ability to have good distributed infrastructure with high availability is absolutely critical to carrying out the mission of changing your business from linear broadcast into all platforms everywhere.
I imagine this has been a show where you've had lots of conversations with customers. Have you seen any other areas where they're asking questions that maybe this time 12 months or 18 months ago you weren't having some discussions? Any emerging areas? Cloud, you've mentioned. Is there any other areas that you see as becoming very prevalent as a topic of conversation?
The large challenge where it's actually emerging even more these days is we're part of the category we call it would be active archive. Okay. And how do I leverage value out of that archive so that I can extract more revenue from the assets that I have? How do I understand the assets that are in there in order to be able to deploy them the right way in doing different platforms, but also have better agility and flexibility to use that archive? We look at a lot of organizations that have traditionally looked at the long tail effect of archive, meaning the more that asset becomes not viewed, then the challenge becomes I need to store it at an optimal cost layer in my infrastructure, but then I need to be able to call that back very quickly, in some cases in a variety of different formats to deliver to the point of request, whether that's a tablet device or on linear television or even IPTV and on-demand platforms like this. What that means is these archives need to become very agile. It creates hot zones of archive where there's predominantly a lot of cold data. And that shift of what becomes hot will change based on the region and the political infrastructure that's there, whether it's a country-supported broadcaster or an independent private broadcaster, and how they get that information out from that archive is very critical because it's about time to market. In the on-demand platform world, if you can't get it, and made this point before, and it really is critical, you will lose that customer touch. The archive has to be very responsive. So what's really emerging now is disk archive. This is a conversation that, while we pitched it as an idea a year and a half, 2 years ago, it was not really financially feasible to accomplish that. Tape was the way for archive. Nowadays, we have several customers that have actually deployed disk archive strategies today where it's becoming a very good standard to mirror it with tape, but to restore from file petabytes of data. It's an unheard of concept just a few years ago, but it is absolutely a strong play today.
It's interesting that those conversations, we're almost in a curve where we've gone tape to disc to tape to disc. But the long-term conversation we assume is going to be around disc, whether that's solid or spinning media. Not to dispel the value of tape, because tape has a very important part to play, but it seems that it's a conversation that's more around value and less about media.
When we look at that, yeah, exactly, the value media, value propositioning, the challenge there is how do I do this certainly from a first financial way, all broadcasters are under intense pressures on budget to accomplish more with less. And with an archive, that's always a growing thing, growing exponentially because of these formats that have emerged. So when I'm going SD to HD, that's a 4x growth of my archive footprint for the same number of assets. And now looking at 4K, that's a very daunting thing for many customers to approach and consider. But then if you want to be able to make it a 4K platform work, you better be shooting in it today. That's why we see these experiments going on with Sky and other broadcasters that are putting out content in 4K, Saturday Night Live, NBC in the US. When they're working with these technologies and trying to address the archive, the cost balance versus the quality of the archive itself to become a compelling event, to say, I need to go to that archive because there's value inside it and get it out, those two things butt heads. Our job is to try to help the customers convert that challenge into a market opportunity, because all broadcasters, all content delivery platforms, and whether they're online, cable-based, satellite, over-the-air, or IP-based, the more we see IP take that market over and have the flexibility to avoid the limitations of traditional over-the-air 3G to be able to deliver 4K. It's a very strong challenge to be able to run that through routers, switchers, and other traditional infrastructure. Over IP, there's no challenge at all to do that. That compelling event really causes these things to go, how do I move my assets to take advantage of these events, but be intelligent about it? It's a very strong conversation.
But it's interesting that as a storage vendor, you're now having conversations about a different level. It's not so much about the bits and the bytes and the capacities. It's now about, well, what do we do? How do we do that?
Correct.
Does that surprise you that the broadcast industry has become so, in many ways, mature in such a reasonably short amount of time?
Does surprise me, and yet it doesn't. We look at the trends that are happening in broadcast from my time in the industry for almost 20 years. The things I've noticed, especially that are happening in the past several years, the traditional way that we always looked at how we process data, and we look at video and audio, in the end it's now just bits and bytes, how we process that to deliver it as an experience had a very linear feel to it. Now that it has a very abstract, anywhere, anytime feel to it, there's been a generational change of leadership that's emerged where people who have no problem looking at content, in some cases, in many cases, consuming it in vast quantities in very limited windows of time. So we call it binge consuming of media. So being able to watch 12 hours of a content on demand as opposed to watching it scheduled week by week and saying, my preferred method of consumption says, drive it to me now. So broadcasters have had to become very agile very quickly if they want to reach that market as they watch the erosion of their traditional market structure. So there's been a bit of market pressure. There's also a new youthful movement of engineers and managers that have come into these infrastructures and said, we have to change the business because I am with that audience. I don't consume media this way. We have to reinvent the business more aggressively. So these concepts have absolutely become very real today.
It's almost as if businesses are building infrastructure for the customer as opposed to building the infrastructure and hoping the customer will come, almost an on-demand infrastructure.
I remember in 2000 and 2001, it was very much about a market of one. So a lot of materials from very technical magazine organizations were looking at the market and saying the way that people experience information and go seek for it, it becomes a one-to-one relationship. When broadcast, which has been molding itself to become more into this position, figures out the revenue component of that in order to be able to maintain profitability, grow as a business, certainly we're seeing a lot of challenges in the diversification of the marketplace. Some consolidation maybe is appropriate in the marketplace in order to have better positioned vendors of content to be able to deliver that in all the different platforms in consumable ways, as well as that binge concept of just doing it in a mass amount of way and make that profitable.
Yes.
By that method right there, I really see that the challenge for all these organizations to do that very quickly has just led to so much accelerated development of product to marketplace. It's very interesting to watch the broadcast content delivery markets become very IT-centric and become agile, become service-oriented as opposed to infrastructure-oriented.
Dave, yeah, it's almost an inevitability, I guess, that in the very tight marketplace that we are in at the moment, organizations that have invested in content and rights and management systems want to exercise that. The final question before, I know that your stand is incredibly busy at the moment. One final question, what do you hope to see as the big trend of the next 18 months that will help organizations to monetize and develop new services? Is it, for example, micropayment systems or regulatory improvements to help new services launch to market? What's your forward-looking wish list item for our industry?
very appropriate that you mentioned that second point, so regulatory improvements. The market that manages broadcasters and how they put their content out in a very structured way today really has to adapt. It's under a lot of pressure from consumers who want different choices and are prohibited from accessing those choices in many cases by regulations, which are very regionally based. So when I work with the Middle East, for example, the ad infrastructure in that market is very, I would say, poorly regulated, and it needs to have the regulations updated so there can be better coordination in order to improve the ad revenue base and the ability for broadcasters in that region, as an example, to have a better supported financial mechanism, a foundation, to be able to grow their businesses, to deliver the content to the customers the way the customers want it. All these different regions I work with have variations of these regulatory challenges because they've been built using these rules that are in many cases 20, 30 years old or more. Content is shifting so fast. If you look at where the emerging leaders are that are happening in the content production side, so the traditional maxim still does hold, content is king. We look at recent negotiations between the content rights holder and the distributor. Who's tending to win in that case? The rights holder, because the content is a compelling event, and I want that, and the distributor will figure out how to pay to get access to that content. As that continues to show that it is king, what's happening now is other content distributors are becoming producers, creators of that content. You look at organizations such as Netflix and other distributors such as Comcast who are buying organizations, NBC Universal. What does that mean in the business? It means that creation of content is king, but the distribution doesn't want to be left in the position of lacking control over the ability to manage that relationship to the very customers they own. So make the content. When you can own that yourself, what it means is the authors of the content, whether it's the videographers, the filmographers, and the writers, there's an opportunity, I think, presenting itself these days that has never been present before as creators to be able to go to so many more markets. It's weird. There's consolidation, but now I could go to distributors and say, I can give you a compelling event. I could be part of your content creation arm of your team, because that's where you and your business want to go.
I think both you and I would love to see a world where content truly is king and available and accessible everywhere.
Exactly.
Dave, thank you for your time today. So that's Dave Sallak with EMC iSalon. Thank you for joining us today.